Chelsea and I are in London to review the Canon 5D Mark IV. It is the greatest 5D ever by a long shot, with 30% better image quality than the 5D Mark III, a greatly improved focusing system, 4K video. It's a great camera, so why is everyone disappointed? After all, it's something we didn't have before. Well, people have been waiting 4 years for another 5D, and we've been hoping to see things like sensor stabilization, which Sony, Panasonic, Olympus, Pentax, they all have. We've been hoping to see things like maybe an electronic viewfinder to give us that instant awareness of our exposure without having to chimp. We didn't get those things. And if you've been waiting for them and you can't live without them, well, it's probably going to be another 4 years before you get a top-end camera, so maybe it is time to switch.
In both studio and outdoor portrait sessions, the 5D Mark IV did great. We appreciate the improved focusing and touchscreen. They sped up the workflow. In the studio, USB 3 tethering moved photos rapidly into Capture One. If you're currently shooting portraits with the 5D Mark III, you'll be happy upgrading to the 5D Mark IV. Portraits are a little bit sharper and a little bit cleaner, especially if you have to recover shadows. The touchscreen makes it easier to review your photos, and the GPS automatically sets your clock and pinpoints your photos on Lightroom's map. As a wedding photographer, that could let you easily find shots at a specific venue to show a potential client. We compared the Mark IV to the 5DS-R, the Nikon D810, and the a7R II, each with their native 70-200 f2.8 lenses. Each camera is capable of great portraits, and most customers would never notice a difference in the final products. Being nitpicky though, we prefer the Canon and Sony 70-200 lenses over the Nikon because the Nikon shrinks to about 135mm at headshot range, reducing background blur and working distance. We loved the a7R II's electronic viewfinder and eye detection focusing, which was faster, more flexible, and more accurate than the DSLR focusing systems. However, the Sony lacks dual memory card slots, making it too risky for us to use on a professional shoot. If Sony releases a pro body, we'll switch in a second. In the meantime, we'll continue to use the 5DS-R for portraits because we prefer the extra detail the 50-megapixel sensor gives us, even though we miss the Mark IV's improved focusing, higher frame rate, and touchscreen. Our tests and DxOMark's tests agree. The 5D Mark IV image quality is greatly improved over its predecessors, and noise levels are now comparable to the Nikon D810, the Pentax K-1, and the Sony a7R II. However, the Sony, Nikon, and Pentax cameras still offer more than a stop more dynamic range. That's a nice to have, though we found the 5D Mark IV had enough dynamic range for our uses, and you can always extend it further by bracketing your shots and blending them with Lightroom's HDR photo merge. Where the 5D Mark IV falls short is detail. 30 megapixels is a big step up from the 5D Mark III, but it's a big step down from the Nikon D810, the Pentax K1, the Sony a7R II, and Canon's own 50-megapixel 5DS-R. Canon also put a sharpness-ruining AA filter on it, further reducing detail. The sharpness differences won't be obvious to everyone, but if you use sharp lenses and crop heavily or print bigger than 11:14, the 5D Mark IV images will be slightly softer than the competition. You might have seen Canon's marketing material around dual pixel RAW, which they show pulling an out-of-focus eye into focus in post. That would be a game changer, but in our testing, it simply doesn't shift focus noticeably. It also comes with significant penalties, 2 times bigger file sizes, lower frames per second, and it requires you to use Canon's awful software, breaking you out of your normal workflow. We hope a future version of this technology works as well as Canon's advertisements. For full details, watch this other video. For sports shooters, the 5D Mark IV is good, but not the best. Canon used the amazing focusing system from the 1DX Mark II. Check out our full review of that camera to see how it performs. The 7 frames per second is one better than the 5D Mark III, but much slower than the 10 frames per second of the 7D Mark II or the 14 frames a second of the 1DX Mark II. When shooting RAW, the buffer filled up after only 3 seconds of shooting, and it took a while to empty. So if you plan to use it for sports, you'd better be comfortable shooting JPEG. For landscapes and night photography, the 5D Mark IV is capable, but not ideal. We loved the low-light live view focusing, which allowed us to autofocus on fairly dim stars. However, the 5DS-R is a similar price point and would make bigger, sharper prints. And if you're really into landscapes, watch a review of the Pentax K1, because the tilt screen, auto leveling, and pixel shift are game changers. Chelsea and I spent 2 weeks traveling with the 5D Mark IV, and by day 3, we agreed to share the Fuji X-T2 and leave the Canon in the hotel safe. The great image quality, long battery life, touchscreen, Wi-Fi, GPS, they make the 5D Mark IV a very functional travel camera. However, it's a big DSLR and it gets heavy fast and it takes up a ton of space in your bag. For travel, a smaller, lighter, mirrorless camera like the Fuji X-T2 or Sony a7R II are simply more fun to use. The 5D Mark IV is capable of taking great wildlife photos, but it's not ideal. The anti-aliasing filter and low pixel density don't extract the most detail out of your big telephoto lenses. The 5DS-R produces much sharper pictures. The small buffer and moderately low frames per second mean it's not the best at tracking flying birds. A Nikon D500 or Canon 7D Mark II are both vastly superior and also sharper when cropping. Canon is heavily marketing this camera's 4K video capabilities, but as a team who constantly produces 4K video, we would never use it. Canon used a primitive video codec that fills a 256 gig CF card with just 1 hour of video. We have to transcode the video before we can ever play it back on our computers, and that adds an extra step and more than an hour of extra processing per shoot. If you're thinking of using an external field recorder, you can't. The HDMI out is 1080 only. The lack of a tilt screen or electronic viewfinder makes filming significantly more cumbersome. The clincher, 4K video has about a 1.8 times crop, so you'll have to change lenses when switching between stills and filming, and super wide-angle shots are impossible. If 4K video is important to you, we suggest a Panasonic GH4 or Sony a7R II instead.
So it doesn't have all the features you've been hoping for. It doesn't beat Sony and Nikon in image quality, but it's still a Canon. It's still the most reliable camera out there. It still has most of the best glass in the world, and it's still our recommendation for working pros who need to get portraits and weddings done day after day after day. It's a great camera, but for the enthusiasts, it might be time to look elsewhere. If you appreciate honest, unbiased scientific reviews, click like, subscribe to see more of this as well as actual tutorials. Check out our books, Stunning Digital Photography, as well as books on Lightroom and Photoshop, and share it with your friends. Write a comment if you have any questions. See ya.